Modern Metagame is actually in a really familiar place. For those of you playing the format for a very long time, you might be surprised by Amulet and Tron being at the top of the metagame, or Dredge winning a recent Modern challenge and Sodek being the pilot. It's like we've gone back in time, back to where we wanted to be. So for all of you doomers and gloomers and Modern boomers, it might be about time to revisit Modern as a format and just think about how the banned and restricted announcement may have actually fixed the format for good. But obviously that's very subjective. I want to talk through some of the numbers and go through a small sample size, notably of the recent Modern Challenge weekend, talk about some of the results, and ultimately try and draw some semi-conclusions. Ultimately, again, the sample size is small, but let's go through this video. And if you like what you're seeing, then leave a comment down below. Let me know if you want to see more of these metagame breakdowns, and let me know some of the conclusions you're getting from your games, local or online, of the Modern metagame. Let's hop into Sodek's winning list first of all. So Dredge was never dead, just waiting for the right moment. Great moment, great meta call in general, just like kind of where we were talking about a couple of weeks ago with the Black Red Rakdos grief list that took over a big Modern tournament, and just a great meta call in general, even though there was a ban on it. A great, really constructive list as well. Just going through this list in general, if we take a look, a lot of old stalwarts of Dredge exist here. We're seeing the amalgams, we're seeing the imps, we're seeing the ghouls as well, but some notable changes as well. Some very different cards, and something's missing from something classical. So Tome Scour, we'll see later on, actually has a lot of value here. This is a kind of meme card that a lot of Modern mill players tried to play ahead of Crab in moments where there was a lot of removal. Ultimately, folks, Crab is better, but Tome Scour may actually just be better in mill instead of like that 1 mana artifact that like mills you for 2 and you get like 3 counters on it. Life from the Loam is notably missing from this as well. This is more of a grind card where you feed a Conflagrate, but definitely not a format right now where you're looking to grind necessarily. You're looking for speed, because there's a lot of tempo and value plays that happen in this format. And then finally, creeping chills and things still exist, so you're kind of operating at 8 life against Dredge. In a 20 card format, you're kind of starting at 8 life and you need to gain more, so you have to keep that in mind when you're playing against a deck full of creeping chills. But if you look at the matchups themselves, they haven't played a lot of rhinos, a matchup that arguably would be pretty bad because they can kind of go off on turn 3 pretty easily, work around a lot of the hate that this deck may present, and then obviously have endurances. Now, if you go to some of the comments that they made, Tome Scour overperformed, Conflagrate feels pretty bad, and ley lines instead of chalices because it also helps to stop the endurances. Now, ultimately, you can beat 4/4 rhinos. You can generally beat creatures on board when it comes to playing Dredge. As an old Dredge player, I can confirm, but sometimes you do need to get there against these creatures that do present a good clock to you. So again, you're not going this life from the loam route, you are going a little bit quicker. But touching on the Modern metagame and the rhinos idea, Crashing Footfalls right now in the last 30 days in terms of breakdown is roughly about 10% of the metagame, with everything else roughly around the same. You see kind of 9, 8, whatever, so everything's kind of closely represented. But a lot of these decks do have good answers against Dredge. A lot of green, notably being able to play endurance, a lot of graveyard hate against this, or a lot of good tempo swings. Murktide Regent with a lot of spell pierces, stopping some of those 2 mana sorceries that Dredge needs to use to discard and then start going off. So a lot of interaction, but ultimately without the rhinos kind of stopping it, I'm wondering, and a lot of people will question, if this would have been, if Sodek played more of this, would they have lost? Who knows? Again, a big part of these challenges that I want to highlight is, even though this deck is good against this supposed Dread list, there is a lot of luck involved in terms of the matchups that you get. So that happens in any tournament, in any challenge, for any challenge winner. It isn't just 100% skill, although a lot of it is. There is a level of luck. So just addressing some of the criticism that people may have, still shout out and congratulations to Sodek for winning. So cool to see Dredge at the top of the metagame, and or at least winning challenges and having the potential to be a bigger player in the metagame itself. But let's take a look at the breakdowns themselves. So in terms of top 8, Murktide, Tron, Lotus Field is actually a really interesting one here. Living End, Rhinos, Amulet, Grief, Yawgmoth. So nothing too different. We see more Yawgmoths, some coffers as well throughout, but generally the stalwarts, we're seeing Tron, we're seeing Amulet, we're seeing we're seeing a combo deck, we're seeing a graveyard deck in Living End, we're seeing a land combo deck with Lotus Field, and we're seeing Grief as well. But Grief not overrepresented. Grief simply there because ultimately without the consistency and the creature removal that Fury provided and the threat itself, honestly, the deck isn't as consistent and has to provide different options. It's not like a Tempo Fairies list that can get around removal pretty well or have backup options. And in terms of the Saturday Modern Challenge, the first one, this is where Sodek won with Dredge. We see him burn at the top 8, Amulet Titan. We see some Domain Zoo with the Saturday Modern Challenge number 2. Big shout out. You are watching That Mill Guy on the Mill channel. Shout out to Tybalt the Red Sub. 4th place with Blue Black Mill. I'm telling you, Mill is a sleeper right now without scamming the metagame. Tron, buy of a matchup. Amulet, buy. Hammer, buy. Burn, honestly pretty favorable if you're playing 3 or if not 4 Tasha's Hideous Laughters. Murktide, not a bad matchup post board if you can land Ensnaring Bridge. And then honestly, the Cascade matchups, you're playing Surgical main board, that's a joke. Again, just a sleeper of a matchup. I highly recommend all my Modern players get on these challenges. It's looking like we can eat. Finally, the Sunday Modern Challenge itself. Mono Green Tron takes the win with the Amulet in 2nd place. Murktide, Living End, Rhinos, Grief, Tron. Creativity is actually up there as well. With Scam gone, I'm surprised Creativity hasn't made a bigger leap back, but that's completely fine. That's a whole other discussion in itself. But I wanted to take and amalgamate all these numbers themselves and put them into a list here. So this is just a screen grab of an Excel sheet that I have. So I'm just going to zoom out here. Actually, I might just decrease my camera for just a quick second just to actually bring this up. Let's zoom that up. So in terms of numbers here, we have the complete Modern Metagame breakdown in terms of numbers. So out of those 4 challenges that were presented, all the numbers, I just took a bunch of the top decks and just included Mill because, I'm a Mill player. Actually pretty well represented. Rhinos is really high up there. So is Grief variants. So this is whether it's Rakdos, whether it's Orzhov, other variants in general. Yawgmoth is really high up there. Murktide, Amulet, Tron. Surprisingly, for the low representation of Tron and Amulet, they actually transfer pretty well. Tron winning one of them, and Amulet and Tron both showing up in top 8s. They transfer actually pretty well. Living End actually getting a surprising number as well. For a deck that I think gets really easily hated out, still gets a lot of play. Hammer and Burn in terms of just being there in the challenges themselves. Aggro will always have a place. This is a matchup that, especially in the early games of the challenges, if you're coming into it, you have to be ready for. And then Mill getting some level of representation. I'm telling you, Mill is a sleeper deck right now in these challenges. If more players were playing Mill, we would be seeing winning challenges with Mill, more top 8s with it, not just Tybalt taking the lead in terms of the competitive metagame for Mill itself. Now in the extra or better bracket, we see some of the numbers change and some things being surprising. So Rhinos, Grief, Yawgmoth, conversion rate's fine. Murktide is kind of surprising. So 34 decks represented in total of the reported, but only 7 converting to X or better. Saturday challenges being especially rough for those. Now for the Saturday challenge, there's only really 4 decks being reported, but 10 decks here, only 1 converting to X2 or better. 15 decks on Sunday converting to 2 being X2 or better. Murktide is having a really hard time in this metagame, although being a fan favorite, just a really solid metagame plan and having really great options against the rest of the metagame, just not being able to compete with, maybe generating 7 mana on turn 3 or just a turn 2 or 3 kill with a giant, land searching Titan. So a lot of interesting things there. Now Amulet and Tron also struggling a little bit as well. Saturday, no conversion for the Amulet players, but again, Amulet being a bit more of a tricky kind of different archetype for a lot of Modern players to pick up. Just operating on an axis that's very different, similar to Mill in the sense that it is a different axis. It's very hard to wrap your brain around what you want to do, what is the value play, how you want to sequence your lands, blah blah blah. Tron a bit more straightforward. People see the hate, but those skilled Tron pilots will still kind of convert, and the numbers kind of represent that a little bit better. Living End kind of makes sense as well. gets hated out in general, so it's not going to convert as well. Hammer, zero conversion. This aggro deck just feels like it's dead at this point, but I'm lying. It honestly has play, of course, but with a lot of these top decks out here, Amulet has a pretty good game against many decks in the format, honestly. And Tron just being able to get out like Karn and then deactivating all that stuff is insane. And then the rest of the deck just being combo decks in general. Burn, no conversion as well. Just, I don't know. I guess the amount of life gain that Yawgmoth can present, I guess you're losing life as part of the combo as well. And Murktide just countering that out. Grief just valuing you out, and Rhino's just being faster. And then again, Mill, I'm telling you, we're not converting well, but this is a sleeper deck. More people need to be playing this. Look at this metagame breakdown right now and tell me we cannot convert into top 8s for this. But ultimately, let's talk about some conclusions here that I want to draw. Again, the data doesn't necessarily provide 100% to all these conclusions, but I think ultimately the modern metagame is in a really healthy place. It is in a great place. I would love to hear your thoughts about that down below in your leagues, at your locals, and heck, even the challenges that you're playing. Are you experiencing this level of diversity? Are you experiencing a whole swath of what Modern has to offer? Are you just going up against grief mirrors all the time? Me personally, I'm not. I feel like every single game that I'm playing is a different deck list, especially in a league. I feel like I'm playing 5 different decks instead of queuing up to a league where 2 to 3 of those games out of 5 are just griefless or decks that beat grief. So it's really nice to have that variety. It's really nice to see that Modern is honestly in a much better state, and I hope this continues for a long time. We still have 2 to 3 sets of standard decks or standard sets coming out before we have Modern Horizons 3 this summer. So let's enjoy it while it lasts. Modern's in a great place for now, and I hope I'm not eating my words in about a week or 2 before someone discovers something really busted. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the Modern metagame. And please let me know if you're looking forward to playing some Mill. Join the Mill Discord. Let's get Mill on these challenges.